on a frequency where the op had just worked somewhere, but he ignored me. And he proceeded to ignore the US for about 1 hour, only to work European stations one by one. He wasn't calling for Europe either. So there was no North America, please QRX, Europe only. No, none of that. He was just ignoring anyone not in Europe and making about 1 QSO per minute instead of 3 to 4 QSOs per minute with loud US, Caribbean, and South American stations. That was exasperating. How did I know it was happening? Because several times when he was not working anyone, and then I stopped calling, he finally got the call of an EU station calling on the same frequency. By the time he got around to working US, propagation had changed. And now the 8s, 5s, and 0s were a few S units louder, and he worked all of them, but no one in W1 and W2 call areas. Thanks to his, frankly, crappy operating, we missed our chance through no fault of our own. That's pretty frustrating, but that happens too. There's not much you can do about that. As with any operator of the expedition, there are so many factors involved in making a successful QSL, and they change second by second. But make a note of when he was loud and when he was on that band. Send a nice email with a polite request to the pilot or to the operator if there is no pilot. Tell them when you heard them loudly and when you normally have propagation to them on that path, and request that they please come back to those times. When they come back at those times, listen for your area. Often, they will try to accommodate you, especially if you ask them nicely. And they have not worked many US or Northeastern stations on that band at all. I can't tell you how many times I worked rare expeditions on the last day or next to last day because I've sent a nice email and persisted a couple of days later with one of the pilots who's in contact with the team, during the course of the day. Or if it's a small expedition, send an email to one of the operators directly. Often they, monitor and they'll get back to you, and often they'll try to help out. A lot of people really are incredibly nice. They appreciate positive feedback, not just, get out, why weren't you on that band? It's like, hey guys, thank you for going to so much trouble to be there. I listen to you operate. The operators are great. We really appreciate the effort you're making to work all of us. You were very loud on 40 phone the other night. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, I wasn't able to make contact with you, and then you moved on to Europe. Is it possible for you to come back in the next couple of days? Here are the best sunrise and sunset times for Connecticut and New England. Please let me know if it's possible. Thank you. Almost everybody responds to an email like that. They appreciate the feedback. They appreciate the support. You're respectful of what they're trying to do. You're respectful of the fact that it's not about you. They're working other areas because they think it's important to work other areas. I get great responses. My call sign is a bit more known than most, but I think that they would pretty much respond to almost any email like that. And pilots, often they'll see something like that. They want to help out too. It's wonderful.
Who's the pilot?
Pilot, most of the major expeditions have what's called a pilot or a series of pilots. A pilot is somebody who basically is the liaison, if you will, between the expedition and the rest of the world. In many cases, there is no internet access, or maybe there's very modest internet access, or just the sheer volume of emails and communication that we come across. The team can't be dealing with that. They've got their own challenges on the island. So there might be a European pilot, a North American pilot, and that's the guy you email. You can find out by looking on the internet, look up the call sign. Chances are nowadays there's a website with also a lot of good information about what frequencies they may operate, what their band plans are, the antennas we're using, and so on. I recommend that. And if there's no pilot, send an email. Look up the guys in QRZ.com or Buckmaster or some other source. Send them an email. You may get a response, you may not get a response. As far as I'm concerned, you lose nothing but a few minutes of time, and you never know what may happen. Yeah?
Now your question on the sunrise sunset. Does the sunrise favor the lower bands, or does it also work for 20, 15, and 10?
Nothing is the same. Every day is different. It matters. Some days sunrise and sunset don't matter on a particular band. Some days they do. You never know. But the point is, those should be target zones. I get on there expecting to be loud or my signal to be enhanced, on that band, or whatever band I'm on, when sunrise or sunset is approaching, also depending on the band.
Approaching the DX loaders,
Either,
or
either,
your loaders.
either, either. You're just, whoever has got the sunrise or sunset, their signal's gonna be enhanced. And if it just happens to coincide that one of you is on dealing with sunset or sunrise and the other station also is sunset or sunrise, you have a double enhancement. And that makes some really amazing things possible. There are things I've seen in contests that are just mind-boggling where, you know, the MUF on 15 meters may be too low to work Japan, even with my antennas. But all of a sudden, you hit JA sunrise, and they come up several S units, and I'm working them. And then you get out of their gray line, and they disappear, except for the lattice stations. And then you come up on my sunset, and I'm enhanced, and the JAs come back again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like one of these things. You know, if you have a good path, it may be like this where you're working them the whole time. You know, there's all kinds of crazy stuff. And it depends on the band and the opening and the time of year. Everything is different every day. But those are times you want to be on, and you should expect to be louder or to hear stations louder. Whichever, it doesn't matter. The point is you'll have a better chance of working whatever station you want to around those times. And depending on whose sunrise or sunset it is, that may determine whether or not you're pointing your antenna direct path or skew path or long path, depending on the MUF that day, whether or not you have direct path opening and many other things. And these are one of the reasons I love contests so much, because you will learn propagation so much faster by being on the contest. Because ordinarily, when all these enhancements and dips and other weird things go on, there's probably nobody on in the places in the world for you to witness this. But in the contest, you're likely to hear it, especially if it involves Europe or South America or some of the other high volume areas. You're going to hear all kinds of really weird and interesting things go on if you did nothing else but operate a bunch of contests and around sunset and sunrise and different conditions. You see all different kinds of modes of propagation and signal enhancements and tones of signals and all sorts of other things that you can't even imagine. It's really fabulous and interesting. One of the most strange things is when I operate and conditions are good on 15 meters, and every time I stop transmitting, it sounds like for just a split second I continue to be transmitting. And that's what's happening is my signal's going around the world. That's not long delayed echoes, and that's not the modestly delayed echoes where a half a second or a second later. Those are extremely rare. But on 15 meters in particular, I noticed that more than any other band. And then you have the multipath propagation, which is interesting too, especially on 40 meters. One of the reasons it's such a challenge for me to work at JA on 40 or UA0 is there's something that I don't have a Yagi up. So my antennas are not really narrow in pattern. So they kind of spray off the side. And when you do that, and again, it's around sunrise or sunset, your signal is propagating multiple ways, and they come back slightly out of phase by a fraction of a second, just enough to make copying almost impossible, especially if you happen to have a Aurora too. So there's a lot of cool stuff that goes on, and sometimes it's pretty maddening. Okay. All right, so now let's move on to station readiness. In general, you want your station to be at its best when you need it most. First, make sure that your keyer, microphone, headset, foot switch, clock computers, and all peripherals are working properly. This includes any preamps, DSP filters, beverage boxes, equalizers, digital voice keyers, audio switching boxes. There's so much stuff out there now. It goes without saying that you should make sure that any radio or amplifier problems should be fixed properly. Make sure you've eliminated all the key clicks and audio hum. It's bad enough to have these normally, but it's far worse when 5,000 people in a pileup can hear you. Next, it's a good idea to routinely check all of your antennas and coaxial cables and connectors to make sure that none of them have breaks, holes, or anything else that can let in water or moisture. In the woods where I live, critters and critter bites are a constant problem, as is the beating that they take from ultraviolet and heat and cold. I redo many of my cables every 5 to 10 years, and I find that a previously unidentified problem that I noticed but could never verify often seems to go away. Or if they seem to just not be signal strength relative to other people, sometimes that goes away too. There's stuff that happens that we may never see, but if you replace cables, often that's enough to make it go away. I'd also thoroughly check all of my antenna switches, grounds in particular, and other connections for any particular issues. You want to reduce and eliminate any possible noise sources, harmonics, spurs, and RFI so that you can hear as well as possible. A simple terminated beverage, or for the more ambitious, phase beverages, can make all the difference between hearing the DX station and copying the DX station. When I had my beverages up years ago, I loved high QRN and noise conditions because I could copy the DX station when few others could. And at the same time, it meant that fewer stations would call, and those are the good old days. Unfortunately, that's not true anymore. Everybody still calls. But I could be sure that I had worked the station rather than guess. Now, between all the QRM and noise and crud on the band and everything else, often I can't tell. Invariably, somebody transmits on over the DX station when he comes back to it. That's pretty frustrating. A beverage, though, can really help with that. By the way, few things are more annoying to a DX operator than hearing the same loud guy call them over and over again, attempt to work them, and then the loud guy just calls again and again and repeats this pattern on several bands. That's a great way to be blacklisted. Why does the person do this? Well, they're loud, but they can't be heard. So all the emphasis was on power rather than ears. Anyone listening to this person would think they're lit. And I will tell you that when I was in Ecuador, there were people, I didn't work on particular bands in the contest, who were just being so obnoxious that I had to decide, I'm going to work them and then they go away, and then I can work everybody else. But, I don't really want to do that because then it encourages that kind of obnoxious behavior. It's a judgment call, and sometimes it depends on just how you're feeling that day. But the point is, there's no good reason to be lit. It's just not worth it. Become an expert in all the filtering and audio functions of your radio. And now, with the wonderful SDR radios and everything else, which is way beyond what I have, now it's more about understanding the technology of your radio rather than you physically doing things. Whatever radios you use or peripherals you use, you've got to understand how they work. Not just enough to get on the air, but really learn what they're capable of doing and try it out. Some of the things are incredible. Avail yourself of whatever technology is possible and whatever radio or radios you use. So don't just read about them, but learn the best combinations of AF and RF gain, AF and IF shifts, variable bandwidth tuning, VBT, which is older stuff, and notch filter and noise blanker for different propagation and operating conditions. Things are constantly changing. You can have 6 different things set one way right now, and an hour later, or even 15 minutes later, you'll have to constantly tweak it again. But the point is, the more stuff you have to play with, the better your chance of hearing what you want to hear and rejecting everything else. And often, that's just enough to make the difference. Your radio should have several different filters for CW and sideband, in addition to IF filters, if possible. I like 250 and 500 hertz in CW. 250 hertz for extremely crowded conditions and DX piles. And 1.8 or 2.0 kilohertz for sideband. Narrower is not always better. I try to use the widest possible filter at all times so I can hear the best. Just like with software-defined radios, SDR. Our ears and our brain together make the best filter of all if we train it properly. And hearing other stations in the passband can allow us to filter inductively, by contrast, similar to using a diversity receiver. Often I can pick out a station better when I can hear them in the passband. And there's something that my brain and my ears together do. It's like they hear the difference between the two pitches, and somehow I can hear just a little better. It doesn't always work, but the more you train yourself, the more you listen to things and try things, the more you will discover what works best for you. What works best for me is probably not what's best for you, and vice versa. But get used to operating, hearing stuff in the background. It will help you as an operator, because you will almost never hear anything perfectly clear. And if you did, you're sort of narrowing your focus rather than learning how to use all the tools in your radio and in your brain to help you with that. Use multiple antennas on each band at different heights and with different modes of propagation, vertical versus horizontal. You want to be able to cover different wave angles and modes of propagation and paths. Sometimes the low dipole on 80 is loudest to the VK6, long path. Sometimes the beat up vertical hears the long path Asians best on 15. You won't know if you won't know this if you're using only one antenna at one height. Now I realize that some of you may be very challenged in what you're able to do because of where you live or because of what you're comfortable with or what you're physically able to put up. But almost all of you can have more than one antenna. Start with wire, a simple wire. A simple wire hung out off a balcony, literally, something else in the trees, whatever it is you can do. Give yourself more opportunities to hear a station differently. The more you can do that, the more chances you will have of hearing whatever it is you want to work or to be heard. And you never know what they're going to be. This is also where terrain matters. If you're on a hilltop, well, that's going to be a lot better than if you're blocked by a hill. But sometimes being blocked by a hill isn't so bad either, because in the direction you're not blocked by the hill, you literally can get an enhancement because of the hill behind you, which is something that W2 Yankee Victor, a good friend of mine, Dave, who's unfortunately now assigned to the Key, he was blocked to the west and northwest. But he had some enhancement to the northeast, off that hill. I don't understand how it worked, neither did he, but it was no question that that's how it actually worked in contests and just being on the air. So you never know what your terrain may do for you as well as against you. The point is, if you're not on the air, you're not going to find this out. And the more antennas you have to avail yourself of, the more you're going to understand the nuances of your particular QTH. In short, the better that you can hear the DX station, the better the chances of you working it. All right, here's an example you'll appreciate from a recent DXpedition. I have a serious power line noise problem, especially on the low bands, and especially when it's cold and dry from late fall until spring. But even to the west on the high bands, it's a killer. It made the K5P, Palmyra DXpedition, almost impossible to work. The constant experimentation with every conceivable combination of radio filtering, noise blankers, notch filter, AF and IF shifts, ultimately allowed me to overcome the combination of 2 to 3 second bursts of propagation with an S8 noise level. I knew when propagation to his area would be best on 10 meters because I studied it. And having studied it and hearing it slowly creep up north, up the coast during the previous week, I planned for it, even with the low flux number, not wasting any time to try to work him before that time each day. Then I went downstairs to the shack and waited for that narrow 15-minute window each day. Sure enough, about 5 minutes past the time that I noted the previous day, he popped up for about 3 seconds, like meteor scatter. I missed him. But then about 3 minutes later, there was another pop. This time I was ready. I called him on the frequency where he last worked someone, okay? So not in his listening range, but right where he worked somebody before. And I nailed him, even though he was 3 S units below the noise level, thanks to the right filtering combination. Now you might ask, well, if he's below the noise level, how can I work him? This technique was successful on 10 CW and even more crucial on 10 sideband. 10 minutes earlier and 10 minutes later, they were inaudible on both days. Now you guys had a much better path to him than I did further north in Connecticut. I was just too far north. Often, when propagation is incredibly marginal, it doesn't get to Connecticut. I can watch it come up from Virginia and Maryland and southern New Jersey, and often it kind of dies around central and northern New Jersey, Long Island. You know, when conditions are more disturbed, sometimes it doesn't even make it up the 3-lane. The point is, you can slowly see it coming up the coast, and like every day I'm hoping, you know, will it get to me today, will it get to me today? Well, most days it didn't. So I had to be ready, planning for each day. I had to study the times he was on, and which I did by sending emails and letting them know when the best times were. And I had to watch and wait and be patient and understand that I might get a couple of seconds, maybe. So You had to be ready, you had to be ready, waiting at the radio with a plan. And if you weren't, you didn't work it. It was that simple. That's sometimes what it takes. Anyway, so what I didn't tell you was the difference between my rotatable 5-element antenna at 100 feet, the low angle antenna, and my 5-element at 37 feet, which is probably a lot similar to what you're using. The 100-footer is the low angle antenna, always better than the 37-footer. But the noise level is not the same, especially to the west, where K5P is. So even though K5P was 1 S unit louder on the 100-footer, the noise level was 3 S units greater, and he was unworkable. So add an S1, S2 signal with at least 3 S units of noise, you don't work that station. However, there was 0 noise level on the 37-footer. So when he popped up to S3, I called and worked him. This is knowing your station and knowing your propagation. Had I not been completely prepared in both, I would have not worked him on 10 on either mode.
Paul,
Yeah.
so you split your transmit and receive antennas, you would transmit with the 100-footer, but listen on the 37.
I thought about that, but unfortunately, in that second or two that it takes to switch, that might be so critical. So I didn't want to chance it. Because, and literally that's what you're dealing with. On 10 meters, it's like meteor scatter. I don't know if you've ever heard stations propagated enough meteor scatter. There's like a ping, all of a sudden, boop, they're up and they're down. I mean, in a couple of seconds. So I did think about that a couple of times. I did actually try that once on the previous go, 3 minutes before. And it didn't work. Now, whether it didn't work because maybe at that moment he wasn't louder on the higher antenna, I don't know. But whatever it was, I figured, let me go with this, let me try this. Fortunately,